I remember the exact second my world fractured, like a mirror struck by some invisible hand, splintering my reflection into 1,000 jagged shards. It wasn't the day I realized my marriage was on shaky ground, nor even the weeks of silence that hovered between us like a storm about to break. It was the morning I opened the mailbox on our anniversary, the day I once believed would always be ours, and found an envelope with my name scrawled in a hand I knew too well. Divorce papers. On the day that once symbolized the boundless promise of forever. My breath caught as I recognized her handwriting, and a chill swept through my bones. In that paralyzing moment, I understood that everything I'd poured into our life, love, dreams, every silent compromise, had been reduced to a stack of legal forms. And then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife further, the very next day her new man called me in tears, weeping over the ashes. The day those papers arrived felt surreal, like the opening scene of a nightmare I couldn't escape. I stood on the porch, the wooden planks creaking under my weight as I stared at the big white envelope, disbelieving. My heart hammered against my rib cage, my throat tightening with a dull, suffocating ache. Part of me wanted to tear the envelope to shreds before reading, to preserve the illusion that maybe we could still be saved. Instead, I walked inside, set the mail aside, and sank onto the couch. Our living room was a testament to a life spent in quiet partnership. Photos from our honeymoon in Greece, a small collection of antique clocks we'd started together, even the faint scent of her lavender diffuser still clung to the air. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of a marriage I thought would endure. Now, the reality of that envelope promised a bitter conclusion. For hours, I couldn't bring myself to open it. My body was locked in the same position, eyes fixed on the sealed packet like it was a bomb ready to detonate. Eventually, exhaustion and dread overshadowed every emotion, pushing me into an uneasy sleep. I dreamed of her, my wife, the woman whose presence once felt like home, slipping away through a haze of gray, leaving me alone in a deserted house. When I jolted awake, night had fallen. The only light came from a single lamp we used to call our reading lamp. Her reading lamp, really. She'd curl up underneath it with a book and a mug of tea. The memory cut deeply. With trembling fingers, I finally tore the envelope open. Inside, crisp legal documents spelled out the demise of our marriage in cold, unforgiving language. Words like irreconcilable differences and marital assets blurred under tears I couldn't hold back. She wanted out. Not a conversation, not a chance to salvage what we had. Just an official end, as if we were nothing more than a business partnership gone sour. I tried reading the entire packet, but my vision swam and a wave of hopelessness washed over me. Our wedding date was printed there, mocking me, January 17th, the same day she'd chosen to deliver this blow. The cruelty of that timing felt like a personal attack, a final twist of the knife. I spent the rest of the night pacing the living room, mind spinning with questions. Why now? Did we truly have no chance? Had she already moved on? Her silence over the past month hinted at a secret I was too afraid to unearth. I prayed to wake from this torment, but morning arrived, bringing a fresh wave of desolation. And then a phone call, a piece of the puzzle I never expected. Shattered truths. It happened the next day, midday. I was sitting at the kitchen table, actually more like slumping, trying to coax myself to eat something, anything. My phone buzzed against the table's surface, the unknown number flashing like an unwelcome spotlight. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but some desperate part of me picked up, hoping beyond reason that maybe it was her. Maybe she'd explain. Maybe we'd talk like we used to and unravel this tangle. Hello? My voice was rough from sleep deprivation and raw emotion. Is this Derek? The caller asked, voice trembling with anxiety. It is, I answered, confusion flaring. Who's this? He sighed, a ragged, tear-filled sound. It's Evan, he said, words stumbling over themselves. I'm sorry to call. I'm the man your wife's been? He couldn't finish the sentence, choking on a sob instead. My blood ran cold. The man my wife's been, what? Her new boyfriend? Lover? My grip tightened on the phone, heart pounding. For an instant, anger flared. Who was he to call me, especially in tears? But there was a tremor in his voice that begged me to listen. Go on, I managed, trying to keep my tone steady, though inside I was unraveling. She told me you two were basically separated, he said in a rush, words tumbling out. That the divorce was mutual, that you didn't mind. Another sob hitched in his throat. I found out it wasn't true. She manipulated me, Derek. I had no idea she was married, not like this. Not that she was using me. God, I'm such an idiot. My mind reeled. Using him? The narrative I'd spun was that she'd simply fallen out of love and found someone else. But hearing this man cry, claiming he'd been duped, rattled me. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, voice shaking. "What's going on?" He sniffled, struggling to steady himself. "Because I think you deserve to know the truth. She's not who I thought she was. I messed up too. He broke off, swallowing a fresh sob. "Can I meet you somewhere? Please. I need to explain, and I'd rather do it face to face." My initial instinct was to hang up. Meeting the man who'd stolen my wife? That sounded like a perverse brand of torture. But the mention of her manipulation nagged at me. Did I owe it to myself to hear him out, to discover if there was more to the story? The entire situation felt surreal, but a desperate curiosity fueled me. "Fine," I said, my stomach churning. "Where?" We agreed on a small cafe on the edge of town, neutral ground that neither of us frequented. After the call ended, I set my phone down with trembling hands. It felt like I'd stepped onto a minefield. What could he possibly tell me that I don't already know? That she's been lying to us both? My reflection in the window told me I looked as broken as I felt. Unshaven, hair disheveled, eyes ringed with sleepless desperation. Why am I doing this? A voice inside me asked. But I knew the answer. I need clarity. The divorce papers, the abrupt timing, something about it felt incomplete. Maybe Evan's tears could shed light on the secrets that had stolen my wife from me. Ghosts in the walls. Before leaving the house, I couldn't help but glance around at the remnants of our life. The pictures on the mantel, her bright smile captured at family gatherings, our wedding photo framed in silver. Should I take them down? The question flickered in my mind, but I left them for now. Some irrational part of me believed that maybe if the truth came out, she'd apologize. Maybe I'd find a reason to keep those photos. Another part insisted that was pure fantasy. I drove to the cafe, hands clenching the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles paled. The day was overcast, a fitting backdrop to the gloom swallowing my life. When I arrived, the place was nearly empty. Quiet classical music drifted from the speakers, and the scent of coffee beans laced the air. At a corner table, a man around my age sat hunched over a cup, face drawn in sorrow. He caught my eye and I knew it had to be him. My stomach churned as I approached. He looked up, revealing red-rimmed eyes. He stood, wiping his hands on his jeans nervously. "Derek?" he asked, voice raw. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Evan, right?" We shook hands awkwardly, each of us harboring too much pain to hide. I slid into the seat opposite him, noticing how frazzled he looked. Hair unkempt, eyes shadowed with heartbreak. For a moment, I wondered if I looked the same, if the cafe's mellow lighting disguised how shattered I felt. We ordered coffee, though my appetite was non-existent. Once the waitress left, Evan fiddled with his cup, still avoiding my gaze. Silence stretched between us, laden with tension. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I'm sorry. Truly, I had no idea she was still your wife, that the divorce wasn't mutual. I wouldn't have touched her if I'd known. She told me all sorts of lies, that you two were living separate lives, that you both agreed to move on, that you didn't love her anymore." Anger flared, but not solely at him. She told him that? She turned me into some apathetic husband who didn't care anymore? I forced down a bitter laugh. "And you believed her?" His cheeks reddened. "I guess I wanted to. She made it sound so convincing. Said you only stayed married on paper for tax reasons, and that you never touched each other anymore. We got involved quickly. I fell for her. I truly thought I was helping her break free from a loveless marriage." His confession tugged at me. I saw the heartbreak mirrored in his face, a heartbreak she had inflicted upon both of us. "Why call me now?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "She's already given me divorce papers." "What changed?" He gulped, tears pooling again. "A few nights ago I found phone messages, financial documents. She's been planning some big move behind my back. A new man in another city, or I don't know. She was bragging to a friend that she got me to pay for her stuff while she lines up something better. I confronted her and she blew up, accusing me of being paranoid. Then she left, said she'd had enough, that she was bored with me." He shook his head, grief evident in every line of his body. "I realized she just uses people, Derek. She used me to escape your marriage, and now she's discarding me too. I feel like a fool." My mind spun. She's moved on from both of us? I tried to process the idea that my wife, someone I'd known as warm, gentle, at least in the early years, had systematically manipulated multiple men. The bitterness tasted metallic on my tongue. So she's stringing men along, always looking for the next thrill? He nodded miserably. "Looks that way. I mean, maybe I should have seen the red flags. She was always talking about how unfulfilling her life was, how everyone bored her. At first I thought she was just unhappy with you, but now I see a pattern. He sniffed, eyes flicking to me. I didn't want to disturb you, but I felt you had a right to know. Maybe it'll help you find closure. A swirl of conflicting emotions crashed inside me: anger, betrayal, a strange sense of twisted relief. On one hand, it hurt to learn the woman I loved was so callous, moving from person to person. On the other, it explained the suddenness of her demands, the cruelty of sending divorce papers on our anniversary. She was already gone, seeking the next adventure. Silence fell. We both sipped our coffee, lost in our separate heartbreak. Eventually, I mustered the courage to ask the question that gnawed at me. Do you think she ever truly loved us? Either of us? Evan looked haunted. I don't know. Maybe at first. But she's restless. She always craves something new, never satisfied. I suspect she convinced herself each fling was real love until she got bored. He paused, sorrow flickering in his eyes. Sorry? That's probably not what you want to hear. I grimaced. No, but it's the truth. My gaze fell to the steaming cup between my hands. A glimmer of heartbreak pulsed in my chest, but also a strange sense of finality. We deserve better than a woman who discards people like old toys, I thought. After a moment, I looked up at him. Thank you, I said quietly, for telling me. I hate that we're meeting under these circumstances, but at least now I know. I was beating myself up, thinking maybe I failed her or I wasn't enough. But this is bigger than me. He nodded earnestly, tears threatening again. It is. And I'm sorry for my part in it. I never meant to break up your marriage. I cut him off with a weary wave of my hand. Don't. She was gone long before you came along, I think. She just used you as an excuse. My voice trembled. But for what it's worth, I appreciate your honesty. We finished our coffee in silence, letting the weight of revelation press down on us. When we parted ways outside the cafe, the sky threatened rain, a cold wind whipping through the empty streets. Evan offered a shaky handshake. I hope you find peace, he said. I'm going to try and do the same. Me too, I replied, words hushed. Take care. And with that, we went our separate ways. Two men bound by heartbreak from a woman who, it turned out, was never fully honest with either of us. As I walked back to my car, the drizzle started, each raindrop a poignant reminder of how quickly life can shift. Yesterday I was drowning in confusion, I mused. Today at least I have some answers. A new dawn of understanding. The drive home felt strangely liberating. Yes, I was still devastated by the divorce papers, by the betrayal, by the cruelty of her timing. But now I understood that her actions were less about me and more about her insatiable hunger for novelty. It didn't erase the sting of losing someone I once adored, but it unclenched the claws of self-doubt that had gripped my heart. At home, I found myself carefully collecting the photos of us from around the house. Each frame told a story of a time when I believed we were unbreakable. Now, I placed them gently in a box, acknowledging that chapter was over. Strange as it sounds, I felt a subdued sense of relief. I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't solely responsible for the collapse of our marriage. Her pattern of discarding people was a testament to her own restlessness, not my deficiency. I sat on the couch, box of photos at my feet, exhaling a breath that trembled with unspoken sorrow and an odd flicker of hope. This is it, I thought. The next chapter starts here. My phone buzzed with a text from a close friend asking if I was free to talk. Perhaps it was time to lean on my support system, to step out of this self-imposed isolation. Before I answered, I glanced at the divorce papers. They lay on the coffee table, a stark reminder of the end. I still needed to sign them or at least consult a lawyer. But at that moment I felt no rush. Her new man was no longer a threat. He'd been a pawn too. Soon she'd move on to the next conquest, spinning lies to justify her behavior. Meanwhile, I could reclaim my life, piece by piece. A tear slipped down my cheek. Grief still coiled around me, but beneath it all, there was a promise of resilience. She might have chosen to send those papers on our anniversary, but that didn't define my worth or my capacity to love again someday. As for Evan, his tears had inadvertently given me a gift, the realization that what we had wasn't destroyed by my failures alone. Standing up, I reached for the nearest photo, a shot of us on a beach at sunset, arms wrapped around each other, faces shining with youthful optimism. I studied it, letting nostalgia wash over me. Then, slowly, I placed it in the box with the others. Goodbye, old illusions, I thought. Hello, future. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since the divorce bombshell dropped, I felt a glimmer of freedom. And perhaps that was the best anniversary gift I could have given myself. I spent the next few days wrapping my head around the emotional whiplash, from divorce papers on our anniversary to a tearful confession from the very man who'd stolen my wife. When I closed my eyes, I still saw those lines of tidy legal text, the official end of a promise that once meant everything. Yet, after meeting Evan and hearing his story of manipulation, I couldn't help but feel some of the weight lifting. As painful as it was, the truth offered clarity I desperately needed. I made an appointment with a lawyer to discuss my options. Though I'd once imagined fighting for every scrap in a potential divorce, the reality was I just wanted to be free of her. I wanted no illusions left standing, no unresolved debts, emotional or otherwise. And so I found myself in a sterile office with pale walls, summarizing the collapse of my marriage to a patient attorney who scribbled notes on a yellow pad. "It's good you came to me before signing anything," she said, looking up from her notes. "We'll review the terms, ensure your interests are protected. Are you seeking alimony, property division, anything specific?" Her directness startled me. Once my wife and I had shared everything: finances, hopes for the future, even secrets I thought no one else would understand. But now the idea of property division felt transactional, cold. "I just want a clean break," I said softly, though a flicker of anger simmered under my words. "She's already moved on, I don't need to drag this out. I'd prefer the faster, the better." My attorney nodded. "We can proceed. Of course, if she's been dishonest about assets, that may complicate things. But if you truly want to walk away, we'll push for an equitable settlement and expedite the process." Her pen scratched across the paper, and for a moment, my mind wandered to the day I married my wife, how warm her hands felt in mine, the spark of excitement in her eyes. Back then we swore to conquer life's challenges together. It struck me how far we'd fallen from that vow. Now I was in a lawyer's office, finalizing the details of a severed bond. So be it, I told myself. It's time. Letting go of yesterday. That afternoon I took a long walk through the old neighborhood. My wife and I used to stroll these streets, hand in hand, marveling at the historic houses and dreaming about someday buying our own little place. We did buy one, eventually. Well, it was more a modest townhouse than a grand estate, but it felt so right at the time. Now, the memory of that place, those hopes, stung like salt on a wound. She'd left all of it behind, like shedding an outdated coat. Meeting Evan had only confirmed that she'd been seeking new thrills for a while, discarding old attachments in her wake. Passing a coffee shop, I noticed my reflection in the window. My face looked thinner, eyes more guarded. The me that got married believed so strongly in fidelity, in partnership. Naivety, some might call it. Yet, despite the heartbreak, I didn't hate the man I was. I'd been earnest, sincere. I'd loved deeply and honestly. That wasn't something to regret, I realized, it was something to protect for the future. I went inside for a coffee, letting the hum of conversation wash over me. After placing my order, I sat by the window, sifting through my phone's notifications. That was when I noticed a voicemail from an unknown number. My heart clenched. Could it be her? Perhaps she wanted to twist the knife again, or maybe she had discovered that Evan and I had talked. Grimacing, I pressed play, bracing for the worst. Her voice was unmistakably hers, soft and yet laced with an edge. "Derek," she began, as though mustering the nerve to sound calm. "I assume you've met with a lawyer. My attorney said you haven't signed yet, so please don't drag this out. I want it over quickly." She paused, a heavy exhale. "Also, I heard that you talked to Evan. Whatever he told you, don't believe it. He's just bitter. I did nothing wrong. We were dead long before." Another pause, then she sighed. "This is pointless. Just sign the papers, Derek. Let's stop pretending." A click and the message ended. I stared at my phone, stomach roiling. How easily she dismissed our entire marriage. Just sign the papers, stop pretending. It hurt like an old bruise pressed too hard. Yet, I couldn't muster the same intensity of pain I felt when her divorce packet landed in my mailbox. Instead, I found myself shaking my head at her gall. She'd used Evan, and likely others before him, to feed her endless need for novelty. Now she wanted me to play along, sign away my rights with no questions asked so she could continue her life uninterrupted. Setting the phone aside, I sipped my coffee, the bitterness oddly soothing. Fine, I thought. She can have her quick divorce. Let her keep her illusions. I'm done bending over backward. A surge of confidence mingled with lingering heartbreak. This was it, the turning point where I no longer felt tethered to her whims. Facing her at last. The next day, my attorney called with an update. "She's requesting an in-person meeting to finalize terms," she said. "Her lawyer, her, and you if you're willing. It might expedite things if we hash out the details together." My throat tightened. The idea of being in the same room with my wife, who had so callously discarded me and then demanded a speedy exit, filled me with dread. But if it meant ending this nightmare sooner, so be it. All right, I said. Let's do it. The meeting was scheduled at her lawyer's office, a sleek high-rise downtown. I arrived early, pacing the corridor outside a polished wooden door. Nerves fluttered in my stomach, but I steeled myself, reminding my heart that I'd already lived through the worst. The heartbreak, the sense of betrayal, the humiliating knowledge she'd replaced me before we even parted ways. Now this was just paperwork, the final stage of an already finished relationship. Her lawyer's secretary ushered me into a conference room, where my wife already sat at a long glass table. My breath caught. Despite everything, she still looked poised, stylish as ever, her hair swept back elegantly. But there was a hardness in her eyes I hadn't noticed before, a certain impatience that suggested she wanted this over with as much as I did. Her attorney was a tall woman with sharp features, flipping through documents. My own lawyer, Ms. Hastings, offered me a comforting nod as I took a seat across from them. "Thank you for coming," her lawyer began in a clipped professional tone. "We've drafted a revised settlement. Mrs. Carter," she nodded to my wife, using the name that soon wouldn't apply, "is ready to proceed if Mr. Carter consents to the proposed asset division and an amicable separation." My wife cleared her throat. "I want no fuss, Derek," she said, not even addressing me by my pet name from better days. "We can move on if we both sign. There's no need to draw this out." A wave of anger bubbled up. No fuss, as if the destruction of a marriage was akin to returning a defective item. I bit my tongue. "Sure," I said, voice steady, "but let's confirm the details." The lawyers rattled off terms: division of savings, property, debts. My wife occasionally glanced at me, a flicker of something unreadable passing behind her eyes. I remembered her voicemail, "Don't believe Evan. I did nothing wrong." Yet the memory of him sobbing on the phone told me otherwise. She'd done plenty wrong, but it didn't matter now. I didn't want retribution, I just wanted to be free of her entanglements. We reached the last page. My hand hovered over the pen. A hush fell across the room, tense and electric. Part of me reeled, recalling our vows in a sunlit garden, promising to stand by each other's side for better or worse. Now I was about to sign the end of those vows, a signature away from erasing the legal bond. I took a shuddering breath, eyes flicking to her. She exhaled, expression unreadable, and nodded as if to say, "Yes, do it." So I did. My pen scrawled my name, sealing a fate I never envisioned back when we were blissfully naive. And just like that, it was done. The ink might as well have been a guillotine, slicing away every last remnant of our marriage. She signed next, her elegant script as decisive as her announcement of wanting it all over. Her lawyer gathered the documents with brisk efficiency. "The court finalization should be a formality. You'll both receive confirmation soon," she said. My lawyer nodded, giving me a satisfied look. Business concluded. My wife, ex-wife now, rose, smoothing her skirt. For a moment I thought she might say something meaningful, an apology or a final goodbye. Instead, she glanced at her watch. "Thank you, everyone," she murmured. Then she walked out, leaving me at the table feeling curiously hollow. I watched her silhouette disappear into the corridor, a swirl of memories flooding me. Her laughter on our honeymoon, the way we'd dance in the living room on lazy Sundays, the first time she mentioned wanting to start a family. All of it reduced to ashes, whisked away by her hunger for something new. And now, I realized with a twisted ache, she's off to chase whatever next thrill beckons. My eyes shut and I took a moment to steady myself. Miss Hastings touched my shoulder gently. "You're free now," she said softly. "Sometimes it hurts more than it should, but trust me, it'll get better." I offered a small nod. She was right. Despite the ache, I felt relief, a sense of finality that was oddly liberating. Facing tomorrow. Stepping outside the building, sunlight assaulted my eyes. The city bustled around me, indifferent to my life's upheaval. I found a bench by a modest fountain and sat, letting the roar of traffic and city smells ground me in the present. This is it. We're officially done. A subtle tremor ran through me, not exactly joy but not the crushing sorrow I once feared either. I pulled out my phone, noticing a voicemail from Evan. Probably wanting to know how the meeting went, or if his own drama with her had escalated. Once, I never would have dreamed of confiding in the man who came between my wife and me, but now we shared a strange kinship. We'd both been deceived, used. I hesitated, then pressed play, curiosity prevailing. His voice was tentative. "Hey Derek. I heard you were finalizing everything soon. Just wanted to see if you're okay." I know it's not my place, but I'm here if you want to grab a coffee or something. No pressure. The message ended. A faint smile touched my lips. Weird how life works, I mused. A week ago I would have despised him. But he wasn't the villain I'd imagined. Just another casualty of her restless pursuit of excitement. Slowly I typed a text back. Thanks for checking in. It's done. I'm coping. Maybe we can meet later. Take care. I hit send, surprised by how calm I felt about connecting with him. Then I placed the phone in my pocket and tilted my head back, letting the sun warm my face. The city's pulse throbbed around me, car engines, distant horns, snippets of passing conversations. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without the weight of uncertainty crushing my chest. Yes, I was hurting, still fragile from the abrupt dissolution of a marriage I once cherished. But I wasn't haunted by questions of why or how. I had my answers, painful though they were. Evan's tears had shown me I wasn't alone in my betrayal. My wife's final demands proved she was ready to cut all ties. And my own decision to sign those papers meant stepping forward, away from a love that had soured beyond repair. Strange as it sounded, I felt a glimmer of gratitude that it ended before deeper harm was done. Better now, I told myself, than living a lie for years. I stood, brushing invisible dust from my jacket. The future loomed uncertain, but also unburdened by the manipulations I once suspected lay beneath our marital cracks. Perhaps I'd eventually meet someone who matched my honest devotion, someone who wouldn't toss our vows aside when life grew stale. Or maybe I'd focus on rediscovering myself first, building a life that didn't revolve around pleasing a partner who'd never be satisfied. Either way, I had to believe that the heartbreak would heal, that letting go of her on our anniversary, and all the bitterness that came with it, would lead to something better. And if I stumbled along the way, at least I'd be stumbling on my own terms, no longer shackled to a woman who mailed me divorce papers with heartless precision. Glancing up at the skyscrapers towering overhead, I felt both tiny and unbreakable. A paradox, maybe, but one that reminded me resilience was forged in pain. I inhaled deeply, allowing the chaos of the city to swirl around me, letting a flicker of hope bloom in my chest. Yes, I'd carry scars from this. But scars meant I survived. With a final look at the building behind me, where the final lines of my marriage were drawn, I turned away and walked into the busy sidewalk, merging with the crowd. Step by step, I moved forward, leaving behind the ghost of a life that no longer fit. And in that motion, in that simple act of walking away, I realized I was already beginning the process of healing. One breath, one moment, one day at a time.